Hello all. This is a joint work with Stony Brook University and FORTH. So before starting with my presentation, let me give you a summary of what we do in this paper. First, we saw that malicious JavaScript execution is not anymore constrained chronologically to the lifetime of the browsing window or tab. We also saw that rich features of HTML5 API is a useful tool chest not only for the developers but also for attackers. And in order to demonstrate all the above, we present MarioNet, which is a multi-step attack framework to allow persistent and stealthy bot operation through web browsers for the attackers. And some of the attacks that the attacker can launch through MarioNet include those cryptojacking and malicious file or malicious file hosting and sharing. The advantage of MarioNet is that the malicious activity is not attached to any browsing session, which means that the operations can withstand any tab shutdown or crash. Now, there is no doubt that nowadays we have an increasing reliance on web. We use tons of different web apps and web applications every day, and all of them provide us with a rich user experience. And in order for the web browsers to support this rich experience, they have become a quite sophisticated piece of software which works pretty much like an operating system, which provides the web apps with a great variety of features and sensors like gyroscope or fine-grained location and many more. So publishers send part of the critical computations on the user side in order to minimize the latency, but also to increase the scalability of their services. The problem is that this means that publishers are considered by default as trusted to run any code without any restrictions on the user side, even if they bring code from third parties and in order to run on the user device when the user is totally oblivious to the performed operations. And recently, we saw a lot of interesting examples of attacks like the popular cryptojacking attacks on the user side. So publishers can infect users in two ways, either intentionally by delivering malicious content together with the actual content that the user asked for, or unintentionally when a benign website becomes malicious or compromised, or when a third-party library that the benign website is using becomes compromised, or when malicious third-party content gets loaded dynamically into an iframe of a benign website. And we see some of these examples in malvertising. But the good news is that in browsers, the malicious JavaScript execution is constrained chronologically to the browsing tab, which means that the malware can only run as long as the browser tab is open. But is this still the case in web browsers? Unfortunately, it's not. And in order to demonstrate that, we present MarioNet, which is a system that enables an attacker to control the user browsers and abuse their device resources. It takes only a visit to a malicious website for the user to get infected and have their browser become a part of a botnet which is able to launch a great variety of distributed attacks. The important feature of MarioNet is the fact that the malicious computations performed inside the browsers are persistent and stealthy. This means that users can continue enjoying the web browsing and attackers can continue having control of the infected browsers even after the user's browser away from the website. Also, it's important to note that MarioNet does not require any software installation on the user side, and instead it uses only off-the-shelf features of HTML5, which is supported nowadays by almost every browser. The basic features that MarioNet uses include Service Worker, which is a non-blocking, fully asynchronous module, which resides between the web page and the remote server. It runs on the background in a separate thread, fully detached from the browsing session. And although Service Worker does not have any access to a DOM tree, it's able to intercept and handle network requests. In addition, we leverage WebSockets, which allow us to have a full, persistent full duplex communication over TCP between the browser and a web server. And depending on the attack scenario, we also leverage WebRTC, high-resolution performance timers, and cross-origin resource sharing. The key players of MarioNet include the distributor, the servant, and the puppeteer. The distributor is, in essence, the website that intentionally or unintentionally infects the users by delivering the servant component along with the benign content of the website. The servant is the in-browser component delivered with a service within a service worker. It runs in a separate process and therefore operates even after the user browses away from the visited website. Upon registration, the servant establishes a channel with its puppeteer in order to send heartbeats, but also in order to receive the malicious tasks that would be executed on the user side. The puppeteer is the remote command and control component of MarioNet, which orchestrates all the infected browsers. It sets the attacks target and launches the distributed attacks. Here we see the high-level overview of MarioNet. As we said, everything begins with a visit where the user is visiting a web server, either benign or compromised. And the user receives the servant along with the useful content of the web page. The servant gets registered inside a service worker, and then it establishes a communication through a WebSocket with the puppeteer. And that as you can see, even if there is a blocking extension deployed on the web browser, it cannot monitor the communication of servant and puppeteer. The basic characteristics of MarioNet include isolation, persistence, and stealthiness. Isolation because the malicious operations are totally independent from the browsing session and the browser's thread, meaning that the malicious operation cannot affect at all the functionality of the open tab, and they cannot affect the browser experience of the user. Then we have persistence. As we said, MarioNet's operations are completely detached from the ephemeral browser tabs, and the browser can remain under the user's control, the attacker's control, for longer than a website visit, which has been studied to be around 1 minute. Finally, there is stealthiness. Since MarioNet's operations cannot be sniffed by any deployed monitoring browser extension, and in addition, MarioNet monitors the system's resources and the utilization of the servant in order to adjust and throttle the malicious operations, and in order not to raise any suspicions to the user. Some possible attack scenarios that we are able to perform over MarioNet include the distributed denial of service by launching a large number of HTTP requests from multiple infected browsers against a single web server, cryptocurrency mining, where the CPU of the user is being used to mine Monero, or distributed password cracking, where multiple infected browsers perform brute force password cracking. In addition, we also have the illicit file hosting and anonymized communications, where the infected browser can host files or proxy communications of other peers. Now, to assess the feasibility of such attack scenarios, we implement and evaluate some of these attacks that we described. And specifically, we infected successfully 3 of the most popular desktop browsers, such as Chrome, Firefox, and Opera. And in the first scenario, on the left, you can see that distributed denial of service attack, which is an example of network resources abuse. And in this case, you can see that we measure the achieved rate a single infected device can provide to the botnet. And we measured that a single infected browser can contribute to the botnet of up to 1,600 requests per second. On the right, you can see an example of computation power abuse, and we launched actually a distributed 10-digit password cracking attack, where we measure the number of MD5 hashes and SHA-2 hashes a single browser can brute force. And as you can see, an infected browser can reach up to 500,000 MD5 hashes or 300,000 SHA-2 hashes per second. Now, the countermeasures that one could use against MarioNet, for example, include, first of all, restricting or disabling the service worker, given that service workers are the core component of the MarioNet. One could say that we can easily disable the service workers in browsers, but of course this would break important functionality that very popular apps like Google Docs, Gmail, or WhatsApp client uses on the web apps side, and also it would block important functionality like the periodic background synchronization or push notifications that these apps use. One other countermeasure that one could use include the use of whitelists or blacklists. So the service worker would not get registered if the domain is blacklisted, or the browsers could ask for the user's permission pretty much before registering any service worker, pretty much what they do right now for push notifications. Of course, last but not least, we have all these traditional approaches like the signature-based detection and the behavioral analysis and anomaly detection, which take place on the user's device. Now, to conclude, in this paper, we prove that malicious code execution is not constrained to the lifetime of the browsing session. We design and implement MarioNet, a multi-step attack framework which allows persistent and stealthy bot operation for the browsers, and also does not require any software installation, given that it uses only off-the-shelf HTML5 components like service workers, WebSockets, and WebRTC. And these malicious operations in MarioNet are totally detached from any browsing session, and therefore the attacker can continue having control of the user's browsers even after the users browse away of the malicious website. Finally, we evaluated various possible attack scenarios over MarioNet, like distributed denial of service, cryptojacking, and distributed password cracking. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Ben Stock from the CISPA Helmholtz Center. Thanks for the very interesting presentation. Can you talk a little bit about the lifetime of service workers? Because I recall from a paper from CCS that if you get push messages and you don't show them, you will eventually be killed. So I was wondering how you can account for that.
Well, push messages is a different thing. They are used on top of service workers, but they require the permission of the user, which means that you can extend, by using push notification, you can extend the lifetime of the service worker even after a browser shutdown. But then you need to perform some social engineering in order to convince the user to click and give permission for the push notification. So that's totally beyond the scope of our paper. So we don't use any push notifications given this need of permissions. But instead, we use service workers in order to have the lifetime of for longer than a browsing session. So if you visit the website and then you browse away, you can continue having the service worker registered, and then the service worker will die when you close the browser.
Okay.
So the lifetime is the browser will be infected for as long as the browser is open after the website visit.
Okay, thanks.
Abdul from Carleton University. Did you find evidence of similar attacks being used in practice, or did you measure?
We didn't look for such attacks, but the thing is that there are a lot of blog spots where they are trying to perform such attacks by using web workers, not service workers. So there is a blog spot, I think, in medium.com where a guy managed to deliver malware through ad auctions. So he delivered this malware through malvertising, something that we were not, of course, allowed to do in the university. But yeah, he infected a lot of browsers. I don't remember exactly how many because he performed a study, but he was using web workers. So he was using, he was performing the malicious operations in a different thread, but in not a persistent way. So that was the difference.
Juan Caballero in the Software Institute. So if I take a stream view of this, I mean, couldn't I just say that I don't want anything running in my browser that I don't actually understand why? And in the sense that here the service worker is something that is running on the background, right? And I'm sure there is a motivation for it, but even if it breaks benign sites, I mean, doesn't the user actually have a right to know that those things are actually running and what for?
Definitely. For example, one functionality that service workers provide us is in Google Docs, the fact that you can continue working and it performs background syncs when you become offline or whatever. So I guess that the browsers could ask for the user's permission in order for the user to be aware of the functionality that these modules provide, and also understand that in some cases this may be malicious or this may be suspicious. And that's actually the motivation of this study. We are trying to increase the awareness of the users that in some cases the publisher may not be trusted to run whatever he wants on the user side without even asking or without even requiring permission.
All right, okay, let's send the speaker once again.